What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Schmovie. This is episode number 398. My name is Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by
Ron.
I want to lick every inch of you.
I love that line.
Oh yeah. Yummy. This is gonna be a fun
John,
episode.
by the way, I should also say my name.
No, you're just the licking guy. That's what you are this episode. There's no John anymore.
It's probably not good.
I'm gonna call you the liquor.
Please.
The liquor. This episode is gonna be a fun one. We're gonna go over the required viewing that I picked last week, which was the Long Good Friday from 1980. Yeah.
Yes.
And then, a big thing happened between recording last week and this episode. Basically, I don't think we actually discussed it on the episode last week, but prior to recording, we went into this long conversation about the Jonathan Majors trial and, what it was looking like, the stuff that was coming out. And basically, there was a verdict handed down between then and now. And we're going to talk about that a little bit on this episode. And I guess the implications, for his career, for Marvel, just this, an open conversation about what it is, what happened, and what it means. And then just, the bits and bobs at the end of the episode, just what else we've seen in the last week. And I think that'll be it before we dip out for the holidays. But did you guys want to say anything else at the top of the show? Anything you want to drop in there before we get into the meat of the episode here?
Nothing I can think of.
Nothing special, huh? Okay.
No, I think it's all going to come out as we go through this glorious menu of topics that we have before us.
All right, liquor, that's enough from you. So required viewing. Last week I picked the Long Good Friday. I just mentioned last week this was always something that you kind of come across those like curated lists of like top whatever movies, top dramas, top crime, whatever it might be. And any mixture of, crime, drama, thriller. I know I've seen this movie on a number of lists, and I've always kind of noticed it mainly because of a very young Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. And even younger Pierce Brosnan has a quick scene in the movie, having now watched it. But it was always something I wanted to watch. I really, really enjoy Bob Hoskins in general. Kind of came to him later in his career, mainly, to be honest with you, through exposure through like Roger Rabbit and like Mario Brothers. He was in Mario Brothers, right?
Yeah,
he was Mario. And I mean, I just feel like I went back and watched.
He was Mario. Yeah, I mean,
right. And I went back, and I'm so distracted by the licking. I'm sorry, John. I went back and like watched a lot of his older movies, but this was always one that I don't know, for whatever reasons I missed, and it just seemed like a good opportunity to watch, especially because I don't think any of us had seen it. And it was available on a easily accessible streaming service, as well. Well, that would be Max, but as well as the Criterion Channel. But I don't know. We talked about it. Where were you guys on this? Have you ever heard of this movie? And again, to confirm, you neither have had seen it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I've never seen it, but I always see it on the list of like top British mafia movies, and then a lot of top mafia movie lists.
Right.
I've never seen it though.
I think that's kind of where I was noticing it, something like that as well. What about you, John?
I mean, I guess I might be even more obscure than that. I know that I like when you started to describe it, I was like, oh yeah, that movie. I knew that movie existed. I knew there was a movie that was Pierce Brosnan's first movie. I think he was 25 in this, and then that Bob Hoskins, younger, but still already in that kind of playing a type of guy who's a little bit more, like not a standard leading man type, but a guy who can really hold the screen and really hold the center of a movie. And then Helen Mirren, who I think was an established actress at this point, so it's not like they were totally brand new at this point, but it's interesting to kind of go into that. I think so often when we think of 70s, 80s crime thrillers, we think of the kind of classic American crime thrillers. We've watched one for this series for required viewing. We watched Thief, the Michael Mann film, but the idea of like a stylish crime thriller from that era, I think that it was fun to kind of, go across the pond and like, it didn't even occur to me. There's probably this whole sea of British thrillers from that time that I'm not familiar with, and this really made me want to kind of dig into them. But I can see how this movie may have sat as a kind of styles signpost for stuff that came after it, and I can even see now how British crime stories that I've seen on television and in movies. Kind of not so much follow this as a pattern exactly, but I could imagine how this would have been an influential movie just that definition of styles, because it gets really sinister and really dark and kind of downright scary at its worst moments. But it's
Yeah.
also in some ways, a familiar tale that we've seen of a kind of a doomed criminal who's trying to go straight, and just why he's doomed that's why you watch for 2 hours to find out why and how. But the Bob Hoskins part too was just fun to see it. Like this was he's playing. There's some rough stuff in this movie. Like there's one scene in particular that is maybe the best scene in the movie, in my opinion, which is the one that gets the most gory and the most personal. That conversation on the boat with Jeff. And I think the ending is really
Oh my God.
a cool, unsettling ending. It would have been nice if they would have lingered on that ending to let us really simmer in that moment a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it
If
would have
only,
been
right?
Yeah, if only they would have just let it sit there for like 10 more
And,
seconds.
and pondered their fate.
But
But it did give you a chance to see that kind of face acting that you
Yeah.
can see. Like there's a lot going on in Bob Hoskins's face in that final shot.
Man, can I say something real quick? Pierce.
Oh, yeah, he's great in that
He's-
last scene too.
All right, so I'm a straight man in the world. That's a gorgeous man.
Oh yeah.
And when I saw him, I was like, was he a model before or something? Like he's like
You almost think so, yeah.
he's almost too handsome to be a criminal. And when he's like holding the gun all the way, I'm like, man, okay, I get why he was chosen as Bond. Like he was
Well, you also
probably
get. I thought you were about to say. I get why he was chosen for the bathhouse mission
By Colin.
oh God.
in the
Yes,
film.
that was crazy as hell. So overall, I guess what did you guys think of it? I'm super curious because this was a little different than anything we've ever watched, because this is like purposefully mafioso. This is like, honestly, this must have maybe felt like Scarface to them at the time. Like,
I mean, or something. It fits
similar,
into kind
like
of a genre. Yeah.
yeah, it had this like style. It had a voice. The soundtrack is unreal. Like I downloaded the soundtrack. It's just really good. It's the instrumentation is just insane, and maybe might be a little too like good for it, almost. Like not that the movie's bad, but like I was just like, this is spectacular. I don't know why I'd never heard about the soundtrack before this.
Yeah, it had like a very jaunty, almost kind of like big anthem kind of theme
Yeah,
for when he's walking, when we first meet him. I will say this, and I would love to know how you guys fared. The first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, pretty much until Bob Hoskins shows up, I was fucking confused, man. Like
I was something wrong with my sound.
I
was
just
like,
well, I just it was
I mean, like
it
the
was,
shot, like going back to the guys at the table.
well,
and
yeah.
when it finally started going back to people, I started to feel like I was getting my footing. But I swear, for a while there, it was just cutting to new people for a while, and it would cut back. But then it would, like, when it cut to the guy with the scar, who I came to love. Razors is one of my favorite characters. But like when it cut to him, the first shot of him was like a little bit into that sequence, and it's like, what? Here, there's a new guy, and he's got a scar. At least you can tell the people apart.
Yes.
But I do think that was, I know something I noticed throughout the movie was that it would then go to a new segment, and there would be a few moments or scenes or events that you would then put together what exactly was happening, or like who was behind it. And I think that was, there's some of that as a sign of sophistication. If a plot keeps you guessing, some of that is maybe a sign of a movie that's edited a little bit in a confusing fashion, that could have been clearer. Because I think as it goes on, there's all these dialogue scenes that make me feel like, oh, now I understand the last 10 minutes, or now especially that final confrontation. I feel like that's when I finally started to put everything together.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I really understood why we were kept in the dark about the particulars up to that point, but I did kind of like how it was like a small event, not a small event, but like that it's like this guy's, this whole empire is being threatened, and every plan he has for the future is being threatened by sort of a random set of coincidences that just didn't go his way.
go well. Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. How did you guys, did you feel at all confused in the beginning, and when did you get your footing, if so?
I don't think I was confused in the beginning. Like, I feel like I just was like wondering. Well, I wasn't confused, but I was curious as to what was going on. Like, I feel like when you start to piece the film together, like you start to learn more about, what is actually happening. Those scenes make a lot more sense. Especially the movie opening on like that scene at the table with the house and all that stuff, like with the men at the table, like that all made a lot more sense outside of honestly outside of that opening sequence. Like it's like you're seeing something that's happening like over here and you don't really understand it yet,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it's going to have some big impact on this story that's going to come. It's
Sure.
like the snag that like
Yeah.
causes it to come undone,
Yeah.
and I think that is
And that
personally
glass
I felt like
breaking
that.
sound effect was insane.
Yes, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of like that kind of approach to it. I kind of love personally because I feel like it kind of keeps me on my toes. It's like, wait, what was that again? Like, was that Colin? Oh, that was Colin. Okay, and what was this? And you're starting. I don't think it feels sloppy to me. It feels more like just kind of keeping the cards really close. Like,
Yeah.
you recognize characters that were there the more you see them later in the movie,
Yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. I just feel like overall, I was like beyond my attraction to the movie, mainly from Bob Hoskins. Like I love these kinds of movies.
Yeah.
What you said, John, is the key for me. Is like the criminal who's trying to go straight.
Yeah.
Or he's trying to legitimize the business to kind of set up the future of the town, of the men and women around him. It's like this grand idea
Yeah.
that he thinks he has the means to accomplish, and its undoing is, I mean, really something completely out of his control to the
Let's
point
call
that
it
he doesn't
Stringer Bell syndrome.
Yeah.
Stringer. There you go, Stringer
I-
Bell syndrome.
I was listening to Smartless very recently with Taika Waititi, and I
Oh,
watch
wow.
a ton. I watch a ton of
Yeah.
British movies for some reason. And he said something that stuck with me. It's like drilled in my brain. He said that we need more hand holding than any other audience, and I do. I'm not gonna lie to you. I needed some hand holding. And what an American movie probably would have done is that while that was going on, it would have been like Bob Hoskins, like, hey, this is Jakey. He's my friend. He go, you know what I mean? Like, explain it a little bit to me. But the way
There's like a narration or a voiceover.
yes,
Yeah,
and he was saying like when he makes movies for Americans, he literally has to make movies like that. It almost has to like over explain it because people are really uncomfortable with the first act or so being like, there's a reason why this is all happening like this, and I needed that. But
yeah.
when I relaxed a little bit, because I thought that something was wrong with me at first. I was like, am I having a panic attack? Like I'm like literally like, what is happening right now? Why are these people doing this? But then also another thing I'll say is like, this is on a mono track. This movie was on a mono track, and there's something about mono tracks that are kind of magical. All the sound is there. It's not thrown around in stereo. Like it has to be mixed almost perfectly in order for you to see the movie as it was intended.
Right. When something's mixed in mono, it's all just relative volume levels. That's it. Like there's nothing else. So
it
it's
just
like
is what it is.
something's louder than something else in the
Yeah.
mix. That's why you can hear it better. So
Yeah.
it is. I mean, that's why sometimes mono music can sound really punchy and really jump out of the speakers
Yeah.
because it's like everything's just very direct.
It was just really fun watching a mono. I love mono tracks. And like, every once in a while I'll be like, well, I'd rather hear it in,
Yeah.
stereo, or I'd rather hear it. But it really was punchy. Like when you heard that, like you said, the glass breaking, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Well, because it goes into some like space reverb delay, something. There was some weird effect that it went on it. But I thought the whole movie was going to be that crazy, but that was really the only moment that I remember being that insane.
The car crash kind of had that too. Like there was definitely some added, like two cars hitting each other don't make the sounds that
well, and that
accident made.
explosion was the kind of that's such a movie thing. But I really loved the setting of the box at the race, where the guy was eating, and I thought that whole scene was just the look and feel of that room was really cool. Like I kind of wanted to hang out in that room until the guys with shotguns ran in. Of course, then I was like, I'm glad I'm not there. But I just thought that was a cool staging of a scene, and I think there were lots of moments in it that felt very much like, oh, this is a cool. What you want to see from this kind of movie. They scoped out, like it feels kind of Hitchcockian or something. It feels like
for sure.
a set or a scene that everything is very designed and orchestrated for cool visuals, cool angles, and I I think this is also, you know, it's kind of a 70s movie that got held over. Like I think it sat on the shelf for a couple of years or
Oh
something.
wow.
Or did I read that? I think it was
I'm not
maybe made a
sure.
couple of years before. But the other actor that I did not know was in it. That was Belloc, right? Colin was
Yes.
Paul Freeman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Ah.
Bad guy from that. And I think, but there's lots of people that are kind of fun to spot like that in it, but he was the main one. No, I enjoyed this. I do think that it was what I'm kind of referring to as well, as far as that kind of opening stretch being a little bit odd, is just the way that it was shot and the way that it was edited. I honestly feel like it had a sort of weirdness, artiness
It
to it
did.
that
Yeah.
was something I typically respond to. So even if I was a little confused, I was definitely like totally engaged and I was totally ready. And the moment that we cut to Bob Hoskins is when that music you're talking about kicks in, Ronald. And that's like when the movie really feels like it starts. And so I
Yeah.
would say, with all due respect to, like, I think you're right that it's like it's part of the deliberate aspect of it that the opening stretch is a little bit more off-putting. But I also think that like there's always a way to have, like, for it to have felt like it went up that much of a notch when we finally are with him. Maybe that
Yeah.
was just me realizing I had rented the right movie, or no, that it was on Max. You're right, but when I started watching it, it was such an
Yeah.
anonymous like opening sequence,
It
and there were
was.
nobody I recognized. Maybe that's part of what that opening
Yeah.
sequence did to me, was that I was like, wait, where's? I know this
It's
has
like
got
that
Pierce
graphic in the
Brosnan.
middle. It's like handmade films. I'm like,
Yeah,
is what is this
and,
really
and
is?
I swear I missed his name and maybe Helen Mirren's name in the opening credits too. And so I was looking at all
Oh
these
wow.
names that I did not recognize. Like I
Okay.
looked
Yeah. Yeah.
away and
Yeah.
came back. And so I really was like, am I even watching the right movie? Or is this some weird thing where the link on Max goes to the wrong movie?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But no, but as soon as I saw him, I realized, okay, no, I'm definitely watching the right thing. And I realized I had not seen him. I've seen him a few years later than this. But I had not really seen him at this point in his career. So I'm actually very interested in maybe trying to figure out what he did around this time as well, and
Yeah.
branching out from there. So
I feel like a young Guy Ritchie saw this movie and was
Mhm.
like, "Hey, I'm inspired."
Absolutely.
And he's like, "I'm gonna
Totally.
pluck." If you look at the cast, they literally plucked all these people out of this movie, and they're in all, if not most, of Guy Ritchie's movies. It's crazy. It's crazy how many people he was like, boop, boop, "I like you. Boop. You were in my favorite movie growing up." Boop. You know what I mean? I'm just saying this just
Yeah.
feels like something he would love because it has like the style that he embraces, the dialogue. And Helen, can we talk about Helen Mirren for a second? Gorgeous, 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 gorgeous in his acting her ass off. There's this power that it's funny when you see, Bob Hoskins kind of going around being tough. You kind of realize that there's somebody in the background that's keeping him afloat
Yeah.
during all this stuff. And I love to see a thug cry, man. I love to see a guy going through it. Sometimes you watch movies and people are just heartless and not feeling the emotion of it. When he found out that his friend died and when he had to do what he had to do, like there was some real emotion. I don't want to see his feet. I don't like feet, but I love to see him crying in the shower and feeling all the emotion of it. I hated to see the water go on his feet. I hated to see the zoom in on his feet. His big toe was the nail was a little too big for me. But yeah, I just really loved.
That's a tough man's toe.
It's a tough, yeah, it is.
He's
a
got no
tough
time
message.
for those feet,
A
Ronald. He's
strong
taking care
man.
of the
What do they
city.
call
Yeah.
it? Don't they call in England? Don't they have a strong man or something? There's a type. I think it might be the strong man type. That's a strong man's toe. It's a lot of asses being kicked by that toe. No, I
Yeah.
think you're right though that like I would even say the vulnerability of the character. Within a few moments of everything kind of going bad, he's in the car with. I think maybe it's Razors he's in the car with, but maybe it's the other guy as well. But he's kind of in the car, and it's like I made a note of kind of what you're talking about, Ronald, because he says like, "What? Am I just not thinking of something? Do I have an enemy or something?" Like just the way he says it is like,
He's
"Am I just
so
not?"
taken aside by it.
Yeah.
But he's not quite whiny, but he definitely is right, like off his game and a little bit like vulnerable and being very candid. Like also, it's one of those moments where the script that the character's saying exactly what you are sort of assuming the character is saying or
Yeah.
or thinking. And I think
Thinking,
sometimes
yeah.
that can be an effective way to put you in, especially with kind of a blunt force character like this, to see him actually
Yeah.
thinking out loud and saying, um, am I not remembering who would want to do this to me? You know,
And you forgot
and
about the $1 million computer that he need to calculate what was going on. Did you? That was a crazy
Yeah.
line. I love that so much. It really felt like oh man, he must be really feeling this. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I
I
think you're right. The idea of a guy struggling and the guy kind of being off his on, you know, on back on his heels. I do think that kind of to what you were saying too, Steve. That archetype, that character who's got a lot to lose, and you see him kind of losing it right when he's getting close to making the or thinks he's about to make the deal that's going to you know push him forward.
Yeah.
You almost hate to see a guy like that fail, and then you realize, oh, he's actually not a good guy.
yeah.
Just cutting people's butts in Brixton. Like, what the hell kind of torture is this? It's cutting butts.
Cutting a guy across the cheeks
Yeah,
with a machete.
Cutting butts.
Cutting butts. That was a clean cut too, man.
What was that guy's name?
Okay, he had like a crazy name.
No, well, Razors was the guy who did it, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
of the guy in the apartment.
Yeah,
that poor guy.
yeah, somebody.
Errol.
And I think he's kind of racist too. Like there was like some dialogue that was going on when he was talking to the guy. I'm like,
Oh, I felt like there was tons of racism and
well, particularly when he was like talking to him about it, he called him a beast. That was crazy. But then he was like, kind of implied that she was making a mistake by fucking a black dude. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's like, whoa, this got crazy real quick.
Well, also when the kids of different races came up to him in the neighborhood, and he was like, "This neighborhood used to be better before all the scum came," and I was just like, again, but I think again that's this movie doing that 70s, really this is feels like a 70s movie for that reason. The guy's loathsome, and he's like, you're not supposed to admire him, or if you admire him, it's against all the feelings you have about what you see him doing and what you see him saying. So I think that like that was a deliberate move to comment on this type of character. But as we've said before, like sometimes you still question like, why do we need to add that layer on to a story? I think at the time it might have seemed more like dealing with something that needed to be dealt with. But in retrospect, it can seem like a way of still marginalizing the black characters to these odd roles. Like when that guy's under the car working and they come up, I just got so nervous. I was like, well, how bad is this going to get? I was relieved that it only got as bad as it did, honestly.
Yeah.
I kept thinking this movie was going to take a turn towards, again, in the name of making the characters look bad. But I thought it was going to go pretty bad. And then of course he knocks that woman around, which is always awful. And I feel like movies of this time just show that as though that's just something that happens and we're not supposed to make too much of a judgment about it. I don't know. Or maybe that's another thing that's supposed to be like squarely in the we're supposed to hate this guy camp. But it always is presented in that like 40s movies way where it's like, oh, people just slap each other back and forth sometimes when they get upset, and now that seems utterly insane.
It is. Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to say, you had already kind of touched it a little bit when you mentioned Guy Ritchie, but like watching this movie, especially the mainly seeing Bob Hoskins kind of like walk into the movie, and this is an actor who has been in Guy Ritchie films, but all I could think of, whether they remade this or just he kind of carries himself in such a similar manner to the way Bob Hoskins did. It even kind of built the same is you guys know Stephen Graham?
Oh yes, I was about to say if Steve doesn't say Steve Graham, then this is
I was like the whole movie I was like, this is Stephen Graham, like a character that he could play and kill, like he'd be amazing in this kind of role. And he's in Snatch, obviously, and he's in other movies where he kind of plays a version of this character, whether it's the head guy or an underling or whatever, but he's a character actor that I always see and I love. And I'll watch a movie.
I'll watch anything.
We've had a movie, one of that sci-fi movie that I picked that he was, or you may have picked. Remember that one with the where he was the guy
with
that
the ball with the
yes.
That was such a good movie, man.
He was like the villain, remember?
He was.
Yeah. So like I'll always watch it if he's in a movie. And I was like, if they remade this or did something like this, I was like, he's the perfect guy, man.
Yeah.
Well, when you say that, Steve, I'm thinking totally about when he played his role as Al Capone on Boardwalk Empire. And I just pulled up the quote. I love that season that ends with him rolling in. He's like when Al Capone is like the cavalry, like
Yep.
he's a terrible guy, you hate him, but then he's the
Yeah.
one he's going to save Nucky's ass at the end of one of the seasons, and he comes in and he says, "We've been on the road for 18 hours. I need a bath, some chow. Then you and me sit down and we talk about who dies."
That's it.
So-
Fucking
And
great.
you've never been happier to see a like a
A
a
villain.
terrible
Yeah.
a villainous
Yeah.
character like that. No, when you were saying it, I was picturing him, and then when I was starting to think, oh yeah, no, this is a specific guy that I'm picturing, and then I
Yeah,
went as you were,
totally him.
yeah, no, totally right, and it the Guy Ritchie thing is dead on, but I also think there's just that tradition of kind of British crime that you can kind of see going to this where it does get real nasty real quick, but it's kind of over fast, and then you're back to the sort of kind of patient pacing and tone. Um, but I thought this movie had a certain kind of style to it as well. And I don't think that when I mentioned Michael Mann earlier, I was like, this isn't like totally analogous to Michael Mann, but it's not totally
Right.
a million miles away from the kind of thing he
I
would be
think that's
doing.
on. I
Yeah.
think
You
that's
know,
Yeah,
good.
for sure.
It's like a moody kind of slow paced thriller that is not trying to be retro. It's trying to be of the moment. It's trying to feel modern for its
Yeah,
time.
for sure.
All right. Who's next?
Well, who's next? Oh, that's me.
Yeah,
It's you, John.
Well, this one is one of those where a thought leads to a thought, and I have my list of movies that I always I'm like one day I'm gonna watch, and I've stopped watching those movies because I think I'll get to them on this show. So there was some recently I was talking to some friends, and I don't know if it ever comes up with you guys since we do this podcast, but if you ever talk to a friend that listens to the show, it's always very flattering when you find out somebody listens to the show for one thing.
Yeah.
But there was talk of like me as someone who seems like I've seen every movie or I try to see every movie, and so it's strange to these friends of mine that I haven't seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
What?
I've never sat down and watched the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I'm gonna have to side with you on that. I don't know if I have either.
Okay,
Wow.
and I don't think I'm ready to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I do want to watch a musical that has sort of like horror
pivot.
overtones, and maybe is from a similar era. So from right around that time, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. This is a movie that comes up a lot. I hear a lot of talk about it, but I'm ready to see it. It's one of Brian De Palma's early films. It's actually the seventh movie he directed, but it's still kind of in his early days. Um, and it's got songs written by Paul Williams, who has written a lot of great songs. If you know Paul Williams's work, and he was a beloved. Is still with us, right? Paul Williams, I believe, a beloved actor and presence, and just generally interesting, clever guy. But Phantom of the Paradise from 1974, it can be described as a sort of horror comedy musical
Oh,
apparently,
wow.
and I've always heard that the songs from it are pretty good. I've always heard that it's interesting. I know a few people who think it's garish trash, and I also know many more people who seem to think that it's kind of a one of those little cult classics, and maybe it'll be a stepping stone. Maybe if I really enjoy Phantom of the Paradise, maybe then I'll be ready for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But yes, from 1974. I hate to always give the 70s get a lot of action, 70s into the 80s, but I was looking at my list of upcoming options, and this was the one that I think is the most blind spot for me, because I do hear a lot of chatter about it, and I know a lot of people that view it as sort of a cult classic. So, and I think it's out
Nice.
there. I think it's in many places. I didn't actually look to see, but I feel like it's one of those movies that's always available. Did you just look to see where it is, Steve?
Yeah, I'm looking now.
Okay.
Let's see the Phantom.
Yeah, it looks like it's on Google Play, Apple TV, Vudu, Amazon Prime. I mean, for rental, but
Wait, why am I not seeing it? What am I typing wrong? The Phantom of Paradise. Oh, there it is. Criterion Channel, if you want to stream it.
Get out of here.
Yep, that's 3
Criterion.
weeks in a row, man.
Man.
The hat trick right there. But yeah, like John said, basically rental everywhere for basically $4 if you want to
Okay.
rent it
Cool.
on every platform, or if you happen to subscribe to Criterion Channel, it's available there to stream. So, I mean, even if you just went along with us for the last 3 weeks, you probably should have just signed up for a trial to the Criterion Channel, because
Yeah, for sure.
they had the last 3 picks. That's awesome. All right, cool. Yeah, I've never seen it. I've heard of it. Looking forward to seeing this. You had me there for a second. I thought you were picking Rocky Horror.
I know. I knew that
Hey,
was
look
going
at
to
you.
seem
Look
that
at
way,
you,
and
dude.
I felt like it was
It's funny
fun.
that even that happened because like I just had a long conversation about that movie like last weekend with some friends, kind of around that same like who hasn't seen it or even heard of it or know what it is. So it was funny that you even brought it up. All right, cool. Phantom of the Paradise. That's it.
Cool.
So that'll be the week, I guess, the week after Christmas. So
Yes.
in the new year, we'll reconvene and get on to that pick. All right, so moving along, for this segment, we're gonna kick it off. We're gonna go live on location to Severn, Maryland, where we have our in-place legal correspondent Ronald James to break down the Jonathan Majors charges,
Yes.
the case, and the outcome. Ronald, take it away.
Yes. Before I get into this, I'm gonna say the part that we all agree with. The assault of a woman on any level is wrong. Whatever the circumstances were, choosing physical violence is just not the answer. It's just not the answer. And I think sometimes in talking about this, you can get caught up in the emotion of it. We have all had varying degrees of proximity to abuse on some level, right? Everybody has. So I just want to say that before we start. And I it's important.
Sure.
So there were 4 charges that the Manhattan prosecutors brought to Jonathan Majors. Four. Reckless assault in the 3rd degree. He was guilty of that. Harassment in the 2nd degree. He's guilty of that. And then he's not guilty of 2 more serious charges: intentional assault in the 3rd degree and aggravated harassment in the 2nd degree. So maybe we should start with what those 2 mean, the ones that he was charged with. Recklessly causing injury is essentially what he was guilty of in a reckless assault thing. So basically, he wasn't intentionally trying to hurt her, but the circumstances, whether he was intoxicated or his behavior, caused him to recklessly hurt a person. That is punishable. It is punishable. It's a misdemeanor, but it's punishable by a year in jail if you're found guilty of it. And then the second one that he's guilty of is harassment in the 2nd degree. And that's like, so this is the one that they were trying to, the aspect of this that they were trying to get him on, which they got him on actually. He or she strikes, shoves, kicks, or otherwise subjects such other person to physical contact or attempts to threaten to do so. So he did that.
Mhm.
So he's guilty of those 2. So the more serious things, and maybe I should talk about that, which is, to be said too, because like they didn't find him guilty of these 2 things. Assault in the 3rd degree is like when you have the intent to cause physical injury to another person, he causes such injury to such person or third person that causes like physical injury beyond like a scrape, a sprain, and it's intentional essentially. So the difference is he was not found guilty of intentionally causing this thing to happen to the person. And then the second, which is the aggravated harassment in the 2nd degree, it's acting with intent to harass. And then there's like varying degrees of that. They give examples, but so apparently the level of harassment that he showed wasn't as high as the aggravated harassment, but he did have some level of harassment which he was found guilty of. So it's a little, it's complicated, but they basically threw some light stuff at him. They threw some heavy stuff at him, and they wanted to see what would stick, because he is guilty of physically assaulting her on some level. So, that's what happened. Two charges.
So are you? I mentioned us not talking about it on the pod last week, but I know we talked about it before we recorded. I feel like last week you were pretty confident that he was going to be not guilty of any of this stuff.
And let me tell you what was the deciding factor for him.
Yeah,
This is
what was that?
It was a text messages. So essentially everything up until that point was pretty set in stone, that the jury was like, man, it doesn't feel like he's guilty of doing
Not
these
enough
things.
there, right?
Yeah, but his admission, because none of the footage really indicated that he had assaulted her to the point that she had described, right?
Yeah.
Or that he was being accused of. But the text messages were damning. They, it was a mission of, hey, you shouldn't go to the hospital. I'm a famous person. I hurt you, but this isn't a big deal. You'll be okay. That's a mission of guilt. So
Mm-hmm.
the evidence that was shown before that, I was pretty confident that he was going to get out. But those text messages pretty much made the jury say, "Oh man, he did it." And
Yeah, on some level, you got to be accountable for what
Yeah,
happened.
on some
and if
level,
it's
yeah.
not the more severe things, it doesn't sound like. But
for
I mean, it
sure.
sounds like the level of severity has something to do with like premeditated or
Right.
intentionality or something, and I think that may be hard to prove. I mean, I've been pretty unsettled by this whole thing, just because of how, like, there's the sort of clear cut matter of physical harm,
Yeah.
and then there's the more nebulous kind of gaslighting of the texts that I saw that weren't even the texts that referred specifically to the event necessarily. I don't think there was some other texts that were
There
just
was some other ones, yeah.
them back and forth that were talking more about like them arguing back and forth and how her saying I shouldn't have grabbed your phone or I should whatever.
yeah.
Where it was just like it totally read like somebody who was trying to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you mad." Like it totally had that feel to it, that
Yeah.
air to it. But I also think whenever that kind of communication, personal communication is shared, you wonder what who's sharing it, why is it being selected. So I always have a weird sort of queasy feeling about these types of things, even now, even knowing that there's the information that you've just revealed, Ronald, of like what the charges mean and stuff. I still feel like I don't understand enough about the situation to speak on it with any intelligence or empathy or like with any perspective, because to me it seems like you either have an opinion about this kind of thing and you tend to say, I mean, I don't think anybody's like there's not much to say about it except wow, that's sad. That's sad and horrible. And it's bad. I mean, it's like it's a bad thing to have happened to the woman whose name I don't know if we know. I hate to keep
Grace
not mentioning
Jabari.
Grace Jabari.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in that case, I think it's a horrible thing, and I think that it's like it is like the idea of prison time. I was wondering how likely he is to
Yeah,
actually
like
do it. His
prison
his
time?
legal team is already talking about appealing it, so I wonder what prison time will actually be. But a year in prison, at a time when your career was at this insane level,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
really having like the year that an actor would dream of. And it really is. I mean, like I'm not saying like, oh, poor him. I'm just talking about it in the Shakespearean terms of like what a precipitous fall that is in terms of like potential, and then to bring yourself down, stumble on your maybe not get out of your own way. Who knows? Again, I just don't know what happened between these two people. I feel like there is some some weirdness with what was reported versus what was shown, and that you were indicating, Ronald. But
Yeah.
again, having not sat down and looked at all that stuff, I feel sort of weird saying more than I even feel weird saying what I've said. But I think it's just I mean we literally, when this news broke, we literally were, I think we had just recorded an episode where we were talking about what an great actor he was and how we love him and how he's having a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a sign that you really can't get really too attached to any other human being's success in 2023. You have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. But I'm a little curious what you guys think of the sort of more, now that I feel like we've avoided this topic because we didn't have the perspective of like the actual court case and the actual charges and everything. Now that we can and now Marvel has parted ways with him officially. So now I feel like that conversation it's appropriate to have that conversation about just what a gamble that company took on him, and what a strange, unprecedented thing it is, even for them to say we're basing the next swath of these movies on the star power of this guy who we really have a lot of faith in.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about like, again, it's not about the tragedy of
Yeah.
No More Kang, but I'm just talking about just from a movie watching standpoint, what a bizarre predicament that puts them in, to say they had, this felt like something they thought was a safe bet, clearly, because they had, huge tent poles that are years down the road, depending on this guy.
Yeah.
They were slowly rolling him out and kind of building him up. So, there is that conversation about what to do now. And I guess the fundamental question is, do you think they recast this character, or do you think they roll in another Marvel character that could fit the bill, and they could get ready by the time the next Avengers movies roll around, that you would have this character in place of Kang?
I think that everything's been pushed back enough that like I don't think they recast this role. I feel like it feels like there was whether it was planned or not, or there was any kind of feeling about what was going on, or honestly, or even like the read or the polling, or just the feeling about Kang in general as the big bad of what was to come in the MCU. But I mean, I feel like Marvel with Loki season 2 kind of sort of presented or gave themselves an out with Kang, if they would want to pursue that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that was all because of the case and the charges against him. That could have also just been because, of the performance of Quantumania, of just their feedback on people's understanding of the multiverse and the Kang variants. And there's been a lot of confusion as to like, what that all is and what it means. And like, I don't know if maybe the bet they made was panning out even before the stuff happened with him in his personal life. But now that it has, and it's come to this point, and they have parted ways, like John said, I don't know. I don't see, they've done it before, but I don't know that they can recast that kind of character that's
I
been
don't know
that
that they need
present.
to. I mean,
Yeah.
the second that Loki season was wrapping up, I was
Yeah.
thinking
It
they've
felt,
gotten themselves to a spot where they could actually say, "Oh yeah, we did Kang. We got a little
yep.
taste of Kang. We saw multiple versions of him. He was in 2 or 3 projects. He had an impact." Even if you're not thinking about why they didn't continue with him, most Marvel villains don't get the sort of attention that Kang got. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Film over film for
You
sure. Like
you
it just feels like they could use that as something where they say, yeah, like that, what
it's done
maybe that
now.
wasn't the plan,
Yeah.
but that piece is done. We've done that before where somebody's kind of hung around through a couple projects and
yeah
maybe popped back up here and there. But really all that's been is like a fleece for a
Yeah.
bigger thing that's been happening that we haven't even noticed or haven't paid attention to. And that's really the challenge of what they have to do is
yeah
if they go the other route of a new villain, people like have been saying Doctor Doom and other
Yeah.
characters, which I think would be awesome, but they have to be creative in how they introduce that idea and, not just act like it was there from the start of this
Right.
next phase. They got to be
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah.
I think that the responsibility to have a big bad is irresponsible. I think what we loved about this whole thing with Thanos is that it was a 10-year in the making thing. 10 years in the making thing that we saw, right? Putting a big bad and plopping them in and being like, this is going to be the new Thanos, the new 10-year person, feels a little weird because it's retreading. It's doing exactly what they did before. And I think that's kind of weird. I think we're at a place where we could do new stuff. So even when it, like you said, like you guys were saying, like this would be like the Kang era. You could
Yeah, we already
literally,
saw it. We got to do
yeah,
Kang.
you
Yeah.
could when we look at the phases now, you could be like, this phase was the Kang era. And then whoever comes after it. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a couple people. I don't why is that so crazy to people? Why can't we have a
No, I
couple?
agree.
What if Doctor Doom is like, I have some minions. It's gonna be A, B, and C, right?
Yeah.
We follow those people. And then maybe Doom comes around as the big person at some point, but like resting it on the same formula that we had literally 10 years ago is nuts.
See, I don't think this is the same formula.
Yeah.
It,
I don't think so.
But they want a big bad.
because we know that they didn't plan Thanos from the start, and they didn't throw him in. He wasn't a major character for several movies. Whereas with Kang, they were starting off with him as an on-screen character who's actually driving things. So I mean, I don't think it maps onto that, but I do think what you're saying about, to me, it's not so much about you can't do You can't have a big bad that you set up. It's just that you can't bank too much on any of these things. Even if we didn't have the Jonathan
That's
Majors, what you were saying, Steve, like the fact that the box
Yeah.
office and the market and the interest level, that's the part that I think you can't bank on. You can't
Yep.
say like, let's take a character. You can't make something out of nothing in that way, even if it's well acted and generally well liked by most fans. And I think a lot of people were excited to see where Kang was going, but there's nothing that makes that character like before this was announced. Ronald, you're a comic book guy more so than Steve, but maybe Steve, you can speak to this too. Like people weren't talking about how much they loved Kang a couple of years ago.
no, right. I
It
don't.
really doesn't matter.
And even if they don't do a big bad right away, I don't think there's anything wrong with like a Civil War 2 or something like that. Like,
No,
there's nothing wrong with taking the pieces that you already have, maybe
right.
adding a couple more, because people want the X-Men, people want the Fantastic Four, people want
Yeah.
some miss. Deadpool alone, obviously, is shaking people to they're shaking with anticipation, right? Even throwing in a couple people and just being like Civil War 2, because that Civil War really should have maybe been one or two films, maybe two films. It just
Well,
felt like
well, the version in the movie was not what it was in the comics at
no.
all. In the comics, it was more of an epic thing.
Yeah, it was
Um,
like an epic thing.
but back, other than Doctor Doom, I mean, because Doctor Doom is the first one that comes to mind that
Mhm.
could be, you could basically take anything Kang would do, and you could just about put Doctor Doom in the same chair and have him making this a similar speech. He wants to take over the universe, basically. He's that kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I think that could work. But let's say what you're saying is correct, Ronald. That like maybe we don't need a model, we don't need the same kind of character that Kang was going to be. What other, I was trying to think of this. What other, even a little bit deeper on the bench, what's the next best Marvel villain that has even anything close to that iconic profile, you
I'm
know?
gonna throw something out there. Galactus.
See, but he's not the same kind of villain. I mean,
He's not, but he's in space, and I feel like they still have the new version of the Guardians. I think
yeah. No, I want to see Galactus, but I feel like Galactus is not going to be the guy who gets us into the whatever they want to do with the Secret Wars,
yeah,
which if it's anything like the comics, there's two different Secret Wars series for them to
yeah,
make it like.
for
But
sure.
you kind of need a villain at the center of that. But I agree with you that like Galactus is sort of the next name you think of when you think of a villain that we haven't really
Mm.
seen done on screen, and anything close to the way it's done in
Maybe
the
a
comics.
redone Apocalypse. I feel like the Apocalypse we got in X-Men was just so poop.
Well, the
You
whole
know,
X-Men thing, like I think Magneto is a good villain.
oh
Um,
Magneto, oh my God. I think Magneto's one of the better villains ever written.
mhm.
Now, if he were to be a presence, I just am worried about we need somebody like he's a really well thought out character. He has a depth to him that you need somebody that can really write that kind of thing for him.
Yeah.
He was like very philosophical. I mean, I know Thanos had pieces of that, but like Magneto was a force. I mean, he literally like got many people to follow him and do, big characters and kind of do his will, follow
Mhm.
his will, follow his path. So I think you need somebody that's super charismatic to be him.
You
Uh,
you you guys tell me the two that I keep seeing, and I don't know enough about either one. One's been lingering since WandaVision, but
okay.
the other was just recently. So what about Mephisto and
Oh,
the
just
Beyonder? Where are those characters, and would they be possible replacements?
The Beyonder is the next thing I might have mentioned because he ties into the Secret Wars in the
Right.
comics.
yeah.
He wasn't like explicitly a villain. He's more of like a guy who plays God and has all these, but you could totally make him into that kind of reality tearing villain. I mean, the thing that worked about Kang was that whatever they want to do with the multiverse, he's a good villain for that because that's what he's connected to is
Right.
time and different alternate paths. But the Beyonder is the kind of cosmic villain that could take you in that direction. Mephisto, I honestly don't have a lot of. I'm not that well versed in Mephisto, but I know that he's basically like a devilish demonic character, and so you could trace a lot of things back to him, and kind of to what you were saying, Ronald, about minions. You could totally have Mephisto being like the guy behind the guy of a
Mm,
number of characters, just because he is kind of the
right.
devil. I mean, essentially, isn't he like an
Yeah, he's
evil
like a demonic.
mystical character?
Yeah.
So yeah, you could definitely have that character be this kind of like lurking evil that finally comes forward that we sort of build up to. He would be a good version of that.
Has Mephisto been acted? This is a weird thing that people do. Like people acted like he was like super active in the current comics, and I
Yeah.
don't remember seeing him in anything within the past. Like,
I was surprised how much people latched onto that. I think they just did because of the Wanda Vision, Wanda Dark Magic kind of
for
connection.
sure.
But it's true that, like you said, Steve, he's the kind of villain that you could just plug into a storyline because he's got a sort of an ambiguous power set. So you could make him, you know, you can put him at the center of something big and make it feel like he's the right scale. But also, I feel like they've done so many of the characters they've made into household names have been these deep bench C-list characters anyway. That like they could any character they pull, they could just decide this is what they're going to go with because tons of they have. It's really just made me realize there aren't that many super iconic Marvel villains outside of that, that handful. Like every team or every kind of universe has its own kind of main villain, and then there's a lot of weird shit, like things like Stilt Man, a guy who goes around on stilts
Now, what would be
and is a
interesting is
man, presumably.
if they do the government thing, they could technically use like the Sentinels as like this like maybe the government is trying to suss out all the mutants and stuff like that and what's the word, what's the term they used before they got the license back? It was like elevated people, super
Right.
yeah, the term. So like if they do something like that, I think they might be able to kind of leverage kind of a blanket sort of presence, like the Sentinels kind of sussing out these superheroes and stuff like that. I would like something like that. That would also lead into the X-Men storylines.
But that still doesn't have that focus of like a charismatic character. But you're right that you could go like evil politician, even though the X-Men movies did that already. Sure. But that's still a powerful thread. That idea of like a human adversary, who's scary because of how powerful they are. But that also starts to feel like the boys that they get into politics and politicians too. So I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It could be
somebody. I got one more for you, and this is one that I don't know even if I don't know that I would want this or if it would even make sense, or I don't even know how it would work comically, like if it's in the comics anywhere. But a lot of Reddit forums have been talking even since the finale that the pivot would be to have Loki be the last big villain of this phase. Is there any chance that could happen? Or is there any precedent for that in the comics?
Well, I mean, Loki's definitely a villain.
Villain for sure.
Well, no. But I'm saying where we left him off at the end of season 2,
Oh, could he make a pivot from there?
Right.
Oh,
would any of that make sense?
Well, yeah, here's the reason why is because there's a multiversal element to him as well. So you don't even have to undo his status as some kind of, time vessel to say there's a version of him that's evil. But if that was seen as too cheap, the only thing I would think is that it would be too soon after that great ending they gave him.
I think so.
Too soon after that to undo it. I wouldn't 10 years down the road or something if they came back and said he goes mad and has to be taken down. I think that was fair play just because of the soap opera nature of comic book storytelling. But right now it feels like they left him in such a cool place. It would be like undoing like the most poetic thing they've done in the entire series, just about.
Yeah, I read these things and I'm like, I don't think I want that. If anything, like if there was a way to bring him back into the story, like as a key Avenger of some kind or something in the future, like that would be even more of an escalation that I think would only add to like his legacy in the MCU.
I'd be cool with Sylvie. I'd be cool with Sylvie going nuts. I like Sylvie, man. I like
Sylvie too much to want to see her go bad guy, though. That feels almost like a repeat of Wanda. Like
it's true.
Like I'm actually interested in Sylvie being involved in whatever next big team they have. I mean, she honestly is one of the characters I'm interested in seeing kind of make that trip. But here's the thing with that is that like the Loki television show still feels a little bit like it's in its own little niche compared to the movies or compared to the cultural conversation about these things. So I wonder if the sense of how huge that feels to us from watching the show, I wonder if the average person who might not have caught up with it yet has any sense that like that's like a big event in the MCU that they that they just pulled off on this series that not a ton of
know,
people seem to be talking
I,
about.
I heard
crazy.
another name thrown around, Hank Pym. That Hank Pym could be somebody that could do it. Like, I guess the idea is like, since he's so smart, he's like, he gets a little frustrated with the situation. He's like, I'm gonna take over, and I can move within the threads of the,
I mean,
that
it would be interesting to see them do that. I don't think they necessarily need to make somebody go evil that we've seen before, though. That to me almost feels less interesting than just go all in. I mean,
making
what they
somebody
what they were trying to do with Kang, and what I frankly think they were doing a good job of with Kang, which was making him an interesting, kind of imposing, kind of scary presence. I would like to see them just do some version of that with a different person, because I like that sense of like the gathering threat, because the main thing I like about that, not so much the build up over movies or the Thanos effect or whatever.
Yeah.
I just like the idea that these heroes are sort of catching wind of like like the end of Quantumania. I know the movie everyone hates, but I really like how that movie ends with Ant-Man kind of half realizing that like he didn't really stop Kang. Like he's walking down the street and he has that moment where he's like, we really
Yes, I
we
love
took
that.
care of it, didn't we?
Yeah,
Didn't we? I think we did. And then you see that he's not really sure what they did. He's not really
yeah,
sure that Kang can be beaten. I'm a little sad that that moment now is just sort of probably diffused, because I liked that suggestion that you could be in the middle of one of these. You could be one of these characters and seemingly fight somebody and win, and then just have that sneaking suspicion that like, wait, I never really figured out what was going on or what their powers were or what they were
yeah.
doing.
Right.
So I liked that feeling, and I would like to see them kind of repeat that to some extent. This idea that there's like a gathering threat.
Terrence Howard, have you heard that one? That he
Yeah.
Iron, so he is the variant in Iron Man, and then
Ang
Iron Man, and then he goes to Ant Man, and then and then you realize that he's been there all along.
Oh my God.
That would be interesting. But anyway, yeah. So
Well, they have their work cut out for them. That's for
Yes,
sure.
for sure,
On,
they were
on many
here.
levels, this is just one more problem challenge that they need to overcome.
Yeah,
And
right.
yeah. And I really do hope in the future that I hope that Jonathan Majors seeks out help. And I hope when this is all said and done, maybe 5-6 years from now, when he has sought out some counseling and figured it all out, that he could come back in some capacity, maybe. I don't know what's I think he's done though. I think he's donezo. Can I say donezo?
I mean,
Donezo.
it's pretty on the picture you start to get of a.
Who he
I
is
mean,
and what.
it's hard to say though, because you are getting
Uh,
like this, you are getting like a sliver of the story. But the picture that I started to get of the guy really did like disappoint me, compared to just because,
yeah,
like
for
I said, just
sure.
days before we were talking about how much we love him and stuff. And I
Yeah.
think that's always a danger when you start to root for somebody as a human and not just as a creative
No,
force.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I
But
say. I hope
yeah,
he gets better. Like, I don't
pretty
want to throw
horrifying
anybody
stuff.
away, man. I'm not into that whole throwing people away thing, but also think that people who do bad shit should get punished
Right.
too. That's
yeah,
the thing.
definitely.
So,
But I mean, but to this point though, if someone does get sentenced to a year in prison and they serve their time and they come out, you know, that's on. I mean, that's something I've always thought like we have to at least seriously consider,
yeah,
is that like if the premise is doing your time is doing your time,
yeah,
that also has to count for something,
it has to,
in our
man.
culture, right? So what do you think about this overall comparison, that this is what happens to Jonathan Majors versus other stars who've had
Look,
things come up? And I do think the situation is hard to compare, because there's not a clean comparison to almost any other situation.
no,
They actually did what Marvel did, what Disney did, is just the same thing that Warner's did with Ezra Miller, which was finish releasing what we have shot with this person with no intention of going any further with them, and then announce we've cut ties in a soft or in a hard way. But either way, that like the Ezra Miller situation is like they couldn't reshoot the movie around a new actor and release the movie they had. They couldn't really
Right.
reshoot the Kang stuff around Jonathan Majors. So they just got it out before they had to make the decision that they just made this week,
Yeah.
So it's
Ezra's
like
way worse than Jonathan Majors and me. Like, they let him cook. Like, he was breaking into people's houses, beating up. He beat up several women, and they were
well, no,
outside.
but
I saw
but
it,
there
yeah.
was the problem with Ezra was that the people that could have come forward with those allegations.
Yeah,
And it didn't come forward.
Yeah,
For whatever reason, that there was they didn't have anybody that wanted to come forward and accuse them of
Right.
the stuff that is arguably worse, but the stuff we have on
Yeah.
camera that's seemingly worse. But I feel like in both cases, like I said, I'm talking about the corporate side of it. I
Sure,
think what
sure.
they did was they hedged their bets on releasing what they had put thought and money into, and then they kind of quietly can end their relationship with that person. Or in the case of Jonathan Majors, it's big news. But they could have quietly phased that character out and not had to say we're firing him. But and I don't know. Then there's other people like Jeremy Renner has some stories about him, and Josh Brolin has some
Josh
stuff about him.
Brolin.
And I think that stuff is like that to me. Again, here's the difference there. That stuff falls under the happening outside of contract, outside of like this stuff they're doing with the
Yeah.
person. So it's like there's not really a clean comparison to say like, oh, they're treating Jonathan Majors differently than they're treating these other people. But it does, the idea, like what you're saying about all the awful stories you heard about Ezra Miller. The fact that there's not like more evidence or more charges, official charges against someone like that is somewhat surprising, even if you don't compare it to other people's situation.
So I'll say this, just from my perspective, the issue is when somebody says like, what does race have to do with this? Race has everything to do with everything. It's the adjustment that you make when you see somebody that's Black, or you see somebody that's Asian, or you see somebody that's, it matters. It plays a part. And I know that it's hard for somebody who isn't Black to understand that, but people make adjustments. And, there has been in the past a history of laws applying to people differently depending on the race and in class of the person. So that's even if they saw Jonathan Majors do a wrestling move on a person on camera, there will always be this like, but what about this person? They didn't do this to this person is it because he's white? Is it because, that's always going to be an argument. I'm just saying that in the community, that is always going to be an argument. It doesn't matter what you say. And it's going to be in my head. Me, a person who has an advocate for women in these situations, I'm just saying that is a real thing. It's a real perspective that is culturally a real thing, and it doesn't really apply to anybody else but us. Like, it's a perspective that no one else really understands except for people who have been systematically oppressed for as long as we've been in the United States by hook or crook, and any other place that Black people have been put in the history of the world. It just is a thing. It doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's all rooted in anything every single time, but it plays a factor. Race plays a factor in everything under the sun. So, that's my perspective. I don't think that it's right. I think Jonathan Majors is guilty, but there's so many other people that have done things. Why did the state charge it when they've been situations where people have seen violence committed? Why didn't the state choose to press charges against those people the way that she didn't press charges? The state pressed charges. They said, damn, that happened. Let's press charges. So that's weird. I mean, it's a thing. It's a real thing. I don't like it. Doesn't feel good. It's a conversation that needs to be had. I'm a Black man. I see it. And I still think that he's guilty. I'm like, get this motherfucker out of here. Like, he's guilty. But like, there's so many people before him that have done way, way crazier things that have not suffered the same consequences. But you're not supposed to, but I'll say this. This is the last thing I'm going to say. You shouldn't do it anyway. You shouldn't be hitting on people anyway. And I can't say, oh, well, those people didn't get caught. Doesn't mean that he should get this grace because he's Black and committing the same crime that his white counterpart has done and not been suffered the same consequences. Just don't hit people. That's it. I'm done talking about it. But what do you guys think? I didn't mean to just drop that on. I mean, but it's a real thing. It's a real
You're
like,
no, you're good. You're good. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, I think in general, the idea of it existing, the conversation around whether you're white, black, Asian, anything like, I think the perspective of anybody assaulting anybody is not acceptable. Men,
correct.
women, period. Like, I don't
Yeah,
care, honestly. Like, I feel like, especially when we're talking about, creatives, actors, actresses,
yeah,
writers, directors who get to do a job like this, who are fortunate enough to be successful in an industry like this, to be afforded the opportunities that they get, or find the opportunities that they, and in a lot of cases they've worked their asses off for.
yeah,
But like the decision to do something like that, whether or not charges are brought against you or not. And I think the Ezra Miller thing, I mean, I think their career is over. Like
yeah,
I charges or no charges, whatever Warner Brothers decided to do, how they handled that situation. I don't think that, what do you call it, the court of public opinion, or like, it
yeah,
is one thing, and the other thing is like, is the town. I think their career is over. Whether or not the Flash was a hit, not a hit, even if it was a hit, I don't think it
yeah,
had any impact on whether Ezra Miller is going to be working a lot anymore. I think
yeah,
that ship has sailed for them. And I think that going the way it did, Jonathan Majors or anybody else you want to choose, there's definitely precedent of a lot of actors and actresses, really having no accountability, or any kind of, what do you call it, consideration for what they were alleged or charged with, or whatever scale it was in, whether it was an
yeah,
actual court case or charges or just reports or I don't know. I just feel like anytime that comes into conversation, it kind of, I always receive it with a feeling of like, this makes me look at this person differently,
yeah,
and especially when you start to see, and it kills me because, like, I fucking love Jonathan Major. John said it 3 times already. Like,
yeah,
it's really, really hard to see those things when it came out months ago. When you see like a young black star coming into this
yeah,
industry, just kind of knocking it out every chance you see him, and then that to happen, it sucks for so many reasons, but it does not suck as much as somebody being assaulted.
Right.
So it's like,
correct.
that doesn't matter at all. We're talking about
Yeah,
movies, you
yeah,
know,
Right.
and
I
I'm
mean,
not
that's
taking
why I said the
away.
only reason that we can even have this conversation is that we finally can talk about this with some sense of closure
yeah,
on
yeah,
what's happened as a result
Yeah,
of it. Because
yeah,
before it always felt like not really our, and it still doesn't quite feel like our purview to get into this stuff too much. But I do think periodically over the course of the show we have, because I mean, we talk a lot about the Marvel stuff.
sure,
We talk a lot
sure,
about the movies this guy was going to be involved in. We were talking about Creed 3, I think, when this story was percolating. So, um,
yeah,
he's one of our guys in a sense. And so,
yeah,
yeah, it definitely is a shocking and kind of disappointing situation. But yeah, I don't really have much else to add to the overall discussion about it, except just to underline that like there isn't really like a basis for comparison on almost any level, like outside of the fact that prison time is pretty extreme. Whenever someone does, Robert Downey Jr. went to prison. There's a
yeah,
few other actors that we know of who faced prison time for the things they've done, and it doesn't necessarily mean the end of your career. I guess it depends on the crime that you committed or that you were accused of. Um, but it's a pretty intense thing for a celebrity of any stature, for that to happen. That
yeah,
feels those feel like real consequences. And yeah, I don't know, like the Ezra Miller thing, I think you're right, Steve, about the career probably being over. I wonder if that will seem like enough consequences, or if there'll be some redemption tour at some point, or what's happening with someone like that. But
this
there are some
motherfucker.
people who you just kind of want them to go away after
Yeah,
what we know about them. And I think Ezra Miller's kind of in that zone for me, where it's
yeah,
like whether it's official charges or not, that it seems fine for them to go away.
yeah,
and honestly, even with Ezra, like Ronald said, for Jonathan Majors, like, regardless of what happens with their career or charges, or any work in the future, it's like, this is still a person, so like,
yeah,
you hope that they still find help or support if they seek that out, to better them, even if they don't exist in this bubble of Hollywood that we see them in. They're still alive in this world, and if they can be better for it, like, that would be great. And if that support's there, I know there was a lot of that stuff like around the Flash release, like the studio trying to help them out. Like, that was a bit of the PR narrative, at least
Yeah.
for Ezra. But if that's real and that's true and that's happening, I think that's a good thing for them. It doesn't mean that I feel like they should be in movies anymore or have that privilege if that's the way they handle their celebrity and kind of abuse it
Yeah.
on multiple levels. But
Imagine if we actually thought that there was such a thing as a rehabilitative penal system in the United States instead of
right.
just purely
Man,
punitive
yeah.
and inhumane. Which I think is why we have such conflicted feelings about this whole situation. Like that's why
Yeah.
prison sounds like such hell, is because it does seem like it's not even really set up to do the thing that it
No.
supposedly is set up
Yeah.
to do.
They say it's gonna be, and having people that are in the system, that just didn't have the representation to get to the point where they could, thank goodness people have representation that could represent them. You get a public defender that doesn't care about your case, you can get 10 years for something that just you weren't even near, so like
Yeah.
just the fact that Ezra is in the place that Ezra's in and Jonathan's in the place that Jonathan's in, it's privilege. There's a level of privilege that we're kind of getting at, that we haven't said out loud, regardless of my feelings about the race of it all and all this. There's a privilege to being able to pay a lawyer a couple $100,000 to just get a year. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's privilege within itself. So
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Like a year.
yeah.
Right.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So yeah,
I think that sums up the whole conversation right there. It's crazy.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But yeah, we'll see what comes. I mean, I'm sure this conversation's not over, and
Yeah.
and especially things that we talk about pretty regularly on the podcast with Marvel and everything. So I'm very curious to see what they decide to do, and I do think that them kind of hitting the brakes is only helping them kind of figure this all out.
Sure.
Which has all happened already. You know what I'm saying? Reducing the shows, reducing the movie output, delaying all these things that are happening. It sounds really bad, but I think in the long run, like we talked about on the State of the Industry podcast, like it just feels like it could be something that gives them time to try to fix it or try to make it the best possible thing that they can do with it at this point. But we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, man.
We're gonna move on to bits and bobs. I want to just say my first one just because it's a perfect in the conversations that we just had, like just about the prison system and race relations and class systems and all this stuff. There's a Max documentary series called Murder in Boston. Roots, what's it called? Roots, Rampage,
and Reckoning.
That was directed by Jason Hare, the guy that did The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan series. And he also did the Andre the Giant documentary for.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, this is a 3-part docuseries that's on Max now. The last episode aired this week.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically, this follows a true story of a murder that took place in Boston. I want to say in 1989.
Yes.
It was reported as a shooting of a man and a woman in a carjacking robbery that had gone wrong. I'm not going to go too deep into what happens in the show because I think it's a really great true crime series. I want to highly recommend it, but mainly just because it really dives over the course of 3 hours roughly into some really enlightening and interesting history of the city of Boston and the police force and the government there, and how the busing system took place in the 70s, and its impact on the criminal justice system there and the prison system. And there's just a lot of layers to this documentary series, which the hook is this true crime element of a murder, and the investigation that preceded it or that followed it. But it's kind of like really neatly and intricately handling those conversations about race and class and government and police, really,
and in a way that's very emotional too.
Yeah, it's extremely. Yeah, I mean,
and like some of the talking head interviews that you get that devolve
the people that it actually
Right.
affects, and
But I
like
mean, but the way that the interviews pop up in this, like that, of like certain stories evolve, and you get a sense of like how this one person did a thing that affected this, that
yeah,
affected this other huge thing, and then you kind of come back to those personal stories at different points. And I thought that was a
yeah,
really cool, that's always the thing that makes any true crime documentary now worth its weight or not, is like, what does it bring to the table? It can't just be even though you can enjoy a creepy story of something bad happening, if it's well delivered, that always feels kind of empty if that's all that it was, and sometimes you feel it feels a little cheap, and a little I don't know, exploitative. But like, well, what's it about? And I think this one has a really what's it about is like really what's it about, almost more so than the story of the murder in this
yeah,
case. And it's so funny in talking about it. It'd be so easy to say just a couple things that it's like, no, 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 experience this as a true unfolding mystery. You really should
Mm.
let the documentary take you through, because there's a growing sense of what what really happened, and who's involved and all that stuff, that I think you kind of have to experience. And the way it ties into these greater issues that you're talking about, Steve, is really heartbreaking.
yeah,
Um,
It's
and scary in the real world sense of like, this is a terrible problem that we clearly are never going to stop wrestling with in this country.
yeah. It's crazy that busing in Boston didn't stop until like late 80s. Like that
mm,
makes
Mhm.
I've randomly have heard people who are like our age talk about it. Like you think it sounds so far away, like,
mm.
oh, this was like, oh, must have been affecting people in their 60s and 70s. No, 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 no. It's very real. And I know some people that have spoken about just remembering it like early childhood stuff, which is crazy. That's like a whole
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of that in this series. Like, there's a lot. There's a really great breakdown of like the geography of Boston, and
ooh,
like the lines between the neighborhoods, and like where a certain type of kid never went and another type of kid never went. In another area. It's just like there's a decent amount, especially of the first episode. And each episode is it's kind of named the sub name of the
Yeah.
series, the Roots, Rampage, and what was it? Well, I keep forgetting the last one. Um, Reckoning. So like, they kind of breaks down with those in each episode. But yeah, the first specifically kind of getting into the idea of the history of Boston and the busing, era, and um, just basically like the shifts in political nature of the city, at least in terms of leaning, more conservative to liberal. And there was a piece of the last episode. Again, this is I don't want to talk about the show too much, except to just really highly recommend it. It's very timely. It just ended this week, so you can go check it again. I feel like people are starting to talk more about it. But there's a one of the interviews towards the end of the final episode. There's a conversation, just basically like in ideas of how the city is changing, or the country may be changing in small little steps.
Mm.
mm,
There's like just a line of dialogue
Yeah.
that a black man says as you see a clip of Boston's new mayor being sworn in, where he basically just says like it's the first time that it's like not a white Italian Irish Catholic man that's
ooh,
run this city. And that it gave me cold chills watching it, and even just saying it out loud again and seeing the clip of her accept that position.
yeah,
And it's an Asian woman, and it was just crazy, especially going through the 3 episodes and learning so much and being exposed so much of this story. Him saying that and seeing the emotion come over him as he says that in the show is moving enough. But thinking about the greater scheme and the big scope of what that means to the people of that city who have, lived under those 5 categories that I just named
right.
since its inception is absolutely insane.
That is.
And it's like you easily forget that. And the show does an incredible job of not letting you ever forget it again. And I feel changed a bit watching that series, to be honest with you.
It's dope.
Especially learning about that city more, and that case. But yeah, it's great. It's a Murder in Boston 3-part series. It's on Max right now. All 3 episodes are out.
cool.
Yeah, the standard now for a true crime series is 3 episodes. Doesn't it seem like everybody's
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
Which is probably pretty smart because
Yeah.
that is where a
I
lot
think
of them fall
so.
apart. Is you don't need a 2.5 hour movie, but that same amount of content spread over 3 episodes feels good. I would even
Yeah.
say I thought you were talking about a different exchange. There's like cross-cutting
Oh,
between 2 interviews right at the
oh,
very end of the thing
the
that I think
cop.
is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
some of the most powerful stuff that they have, and it's almost like they know they've
And it's the
got it.
same. It's the
It's the
same
same.
man that we're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah,
Yes.
the
Yes.
Oh,
same.
Yes.
The same interviewers talking about the political change and the John
The
what
kind of
John's
back and forth
referencing.
with like there's a cop who was like sort of representing kind of evil almost in a sense in this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
documentary, who's
Like
got
this
his
isn't my city anymore. It's
right.
changed.
oh
And
But
my
and
but
this
it- but
God.
his view of it versus the sort of more progressive view, and it's a
for
nice
sure.
note to end the doc on because it actually feels sort of strident and tough-minded, but also somewhat, if not hopeful, somewhere in that track of like you can't, these old ways, these old divisions, they on in some way they are dying out, and it just is painful and
Yeah.
it's a torturous process.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. What else have you guys watched, Ronald? You've watched anything else?
Yes, one thing I did want
Let
to
me
talk
hear.
about. It's crazy because we were talking about Stephen Graham because I'm watching something involving him. Uh, that he could be that character in the remake of is that his name, Stephen Graham?
Yes, Stephen Graham. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Long Good
okay.
Friday.
Sure. Oh, I got real scared. Just I was like, did I mishear that? Okay, so the movie Boiling Point, one of my favorite
Oh
movies
yeah,
of 2001.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
great.
Have you seen the TV show?
You know what's funny? When I looked him up to see what like he had been in with Guy Ritchie, I saw a Boiling Point TV series. No clue that existed.
So it just came out this year. It follows
Crazy.
the events of the show. So
Wait, wait. After the movie?
yeah, after the movie.
After the
So
movie.
when he
Okay,
has
okay.
the, you remember, so I don't, it doesn't give anything away. He has a heart attack at the end of the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And it follows the restaurant and him after the events of that. Like it's a direct, it's
Cool.
almost like a part two almost.
Oh, cool.
So they don't commit to one shots like for those listening. The 2021 movie was one continuous shot, a masterpiece of a movie. This does not do that. Although the first maybe 15 minutes of the first episode are one continuous shot, and then they're like, "Fuck that, we're gonna we have to do some, we have to show some perspective and cut." But it's just as intense. They get into all the characters from the show, and then they
Nice.
introduce some new characters that are like have been kind of maybe in the background, some people that just got jobs there and their struggles outside of the work environment. It's a cool show, man. And I think it's 4 episodes. I'm on the second, and I know it's the same crew. It's the same production company that did the movie. So it's
What is it on? Like, where can you watch it? Is it
BBC. I think you should watch it
Okay.
on BBC One. So BBC USA, US or whatever they call the American one. I think that they have them on there. But if
Okay.
you can't find it on there, I know a place that you can see it. But it is. I'm pretty sure it's accessible on BBC America. Pretty sure.
And if and going back to the movie, if you haven't seen Boiling Point, like Ron said, it's from a couple years ago. It's great. And for our Roku heads out there, it's free on the Roku channel.
Oh,
If you want to
that's
catch
really
up
cool.
on that. Yeah.
It's funny, the Stephen Graham connection, saying that he seemed to be maybe dying of a heart attack at the end of the movie, and then they continued the story. There was a proposed sequel to The Long Good Friday
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
that said that in the opening scene he escapes from the car that he's in,
Watch that.
and then it
Interesting.
continues.
I
No,
would
but
watch
no. I mean,
that.
but then it never went beyond the scripting stage.
Yeah.
Oh,
The director or writer, I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been the director. What was Barry Keefe? Was that his name?
All I'm hearing, John, is that Schmovie Studios has our next
Well,
2024
I mean,
slate. Let's find that and option it.
I'll
I'll get feelers out to Steven right now.
but they basically said that like it just didn't come together, and then in what does he say? In some ways, I'm glad we didn't, because sequels are usually diminishing returns. To put it up there with Casablanca, no one wants Casablanca 2. So it's, I mean, I do think there's some truth to that with like sequels. You know, like some movies are better without a sequel. But here's the funny thing: this is the name of it was Black Easter Monday. That was
Oh,
that was the proposed name of the script.
the fuck is a Black Easter?
Set 20 years after the events of the first film, it opened with Bob Hoskins' character escaping from the IRA after the car was pulled over. Okay, so yeah, I guess it. Oh, he goes to Jamaica, and then problems follow him there, I
Oh,
suppose. So
it just sounds like a bunch of racism will
yeah,
follow.
it sounds like an excuse. It sounds like it's like 20 years later he was like, you know, the first movie actually wasn't racist enough.
Right.
Yeah.
I can
Let's
picture him
put
saying, "Jamaican me sick of you."
Yeah.
Pow.
Harold
Anyway,
Shand is a great name, though. Harry Shand or Harold
it
Shand, his
is.
character's name. It does. I
Oh,
feel like I've
man.
heard a reference to that character, so I do think that there's probably an iconic quality. But I just think that's an interesting thing is that the Stephen Graham connection continues. That there was
there it is.
a sequel. At least they had the idea for a sequel that seems to undo the sort of suggestion of
Mm.
death at the end of the
Right.
first one.
Anything else, guys? John, anything you
No,
want to throw in there?
no,
Nothing.
we're running long, so I'll just save any thoughts I have for a future episode.
Well, there it
Cool.
is. Movieshmovie.com is the website. youtube.com/movie podcast if you want the video option of the pod. We'll be off next week. We will have an episode of what do we call that? Schmovie replay.
Schmovie replay, I think.
Yeah, Schmovie replay. We're gonna go back to one of our Bah Humbug episodes and have that playing next week, just in time for the holidays. But we will be back in the new year with a new episode of the podcast and hopefully some reviews of some new movies that came out over the holidays. You guys good? Anything else you want to mention before we head out of here? All
Not
right,
I.
cool. In that case, as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.